All right, let me turn off the air.
Alrighty. Greetings and welcome back once again. This is Mooney Israel. Live. My sister Mariana has so for it. Live. You understand what I'm saying? Pop my collar one time. And today it's late in the game, but before I go into all that, how are you, Sister Mariana?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you so much
Doing
for
well,
having me.
looking lovely and blue. Looking lovely and blue over there.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. Get my roof on. I have to get my roof on. I had to
you
ignore
got a
myself.
roof on.
You ain't know I gotta get my roof on.
Well, we're gonna have a little discussion about the Book of Ruth. There's been a lot of conversation, and we've kind of been delaying the whole thing for many reasons. And then we got a book for our beloved brother Akwetey. Akwetey, if you're out there, shout out to you. Press one, okay? And I'll definitely bring you on the other side of this convo. But he sent the book to myself as well as Sister Mine and a few others to take a little gander, a little read at his commentary on the Book of Ruth. Did you do that, Sister Mine?
I did. I did my homework. Yes, I did.
All right, all right. So we did our homework, and hold on. So where shall we start? I tagged a few people. So if you're watching this under the palm live in the nighttime, we got flashlights, no worries. And then tag a friend, and so we about to get it in. But overall, what are some of the things that you have heard about the Book of Ruth, Sister Maya?
Oh, well, the mythology is aplenty. Well, there is the idea that originated with the Jewish people that Moab, the Moabitess, was indeed a Hebrew instead of a Moabitess. There's that fallacy. And then there's also a great deal of comparison between Ruth and the woman in the who is the subject of the poetry in the 31st proverb. And of course, my favorite, that the story of Ruth is a love story. It's our very own Hebrew version of Cinderella or something of the like. I've mentioned three. All three I disagree with, by the way, for the record. And
All
you,
right, sorry about the delay. I have boogied over to the other side to say greetings and welcome to those who just joined us. Hold on, let me unpop my collar in case I need to pop it again later. Uh so this is I think we talked about doctrines last week before last,
yes,
on one of the shows, and how these doctrines just begin to form and take shape, and depending on what the person needs that piece to be, you might shave off a little part, or you know what I mean, glue on a little extra so that it can fit whatever narrative we have developed for our view of the text. And one of the things that we usually don't do it on air because it can become problematic, but you think about different aspects of the story that may not necessarily, and I guess that people would call it commentary, midrash, where you're thinking about different aspects of the text that's not written there, but for entertainment value or for understanding value, many will go over and say, well, what about this, or what about that, or what do you think about this, or what do you think about that? The Book of Ruth is one of those books. So tonight we read Brother Akwetey's commentary. Brother Akwetey, I got questions. I got questions on the commentary. You already know we was gonna have some questions. Um, but before we get to that part, whether or not we have questions on the specific Book of Ruth, I think there's some value in rewinding the tape to speak about the Moabites, because there has to be a context for why, out of all the stories, and Sister Maya and I have spoken about this offline, why Ruth has the most detailed stories of a feminine character in the biblical text. She had, you know what I'm saying? She has a number of her book is named after her, number one. So people like Deborah, people like Dinah, which was the only covenantal daughter of Israel that came out after 19 men. We actually recounted from the time of Abraham, his sons, he has seven. Yitzchak has another 2. Yaakov has 12. And out of 19 men, Dinah is the first, and she doesn't speak in her own voice. She doesn't have her own narrative. Her story is told for her. So the book of Ruth is one that is not the run-of-the-mill type of book when you're talking about feminine principles in the text, having a whole book centered around them. So one would have to ask, who is writing this book? What is the purpose of writing this book? And all of these questions before we can get to, in my estimation, when I was actually reading the commentary, I was like, I have questions before we get to this point. What would be the angle of the book of Ruth, and the purpose for writing it, and showing Ruth in a certain light? And so that's kind of what we're going to go over today before we actually get to the commentary for Ruth. What are your thoughts, Sister Mayana, as we do our running start here?
Context is, we always say that context is important. Context is key. Context is king. And I too ran into the question as the commentary unfolded and certain conclusions were being made. I too was like, okay, but there's something that comes before even this, and there's something that comes before even this. And some of these conclusions, while very, very intriguing and very, very compelling at times, there were several missed opportunities to tie certain things together. And I think that although a lot of expert efforts were made to locate the actors in the account and to assist the reader along the way, that having this kind of historical precedent, because there is so much historical precedence about relationships like the one that Ruth had with her first and second husband, and that there is already a discussion about those types of pairings between the Moabites and the Israelites. And since this, like you said, we want to think about why the book of Ruth was even necessary to be written at all. Although, like, later on in the commentary, there's a whole discussion about Ruth as it pertains to Proverbs, and why this particular chapter in Proverbs was written, but not why this book of Ruth was written. And like you said, that's a very important question, especially since we have a history and we already have a precedent and we already have a judgment about what we're going to read about beginning in the very first chapter of Ruth. And so, as we talk about Ruth and as we talk about Akwetey's book, we can look at some of the conclusions. We can look at some of the commentary. And although, like I said, I found it very compelling, and he's an expert storyteller, so it was very, very interesting to read and very, very very insightful. Obviously, I have taught it differently in some spaces, so it was just like you said, the context becomes crucial in understanding how the account unfolds, almost if not more crucial, as the language that Akwetey does take the careful time to parse through and define and give the significance of the structure and the like. So yes, I'm very excited about getting into this particular peer review.
Alrighty, now y'all heard it. About to get the party started. So to first begin, welcome everyone. Again, feel free to share this conversation. Brother Akwetey, if you're out there, press 1 or just hit us up and then you already know. But so Moab, what comes to mind when we say Moab? Who is Moab? Where is Moab coming from? What is the genesis of this particular nation? We like to say the genesis of Israel is Leah and Rachel and Yaakov and handmaidens, right? So what is the beginning to, who was the progenitor of the Moabites and the Ammonites? And one would have to say
Lot and his daughter.
And who was Lot?
Lot was the nephew of Abraham.
So he wasn't this just strange, far distant person who was just totally unfamiliar with some things, because Abraham, when he's told to get up and leave your father's house, he actually brings Lot. And Lot is, he goes and settles in Sodom, which means that his when the herdsmen began to fight, Abraham said, "Let's not fight. Let's separate. We still fam though. If anything pop off, I'll come get you." This is the
Right.
Muna version. Please go back and read the text. Or go back to the book of Genesis, right? So we know that Abraham didn't just totally discard him, and that he was around righteousness, but he seemed to gravitate towards, stuff that wasn't necessarily so righteous. And in this space of Saddam, he has his daughters, his children, his wife. So when when Abraham is praying for the city, the Malak is like, yo, step back. He prays on behalf. The Malak comes and tells Lot, yo, it's time to roll. They were unsuccessful with getting out all of their children, but they came out with the two daughters and the wife, who looks back. She becomes a pillar of salt, and the two daughters escape. Okay, this is found in the book of Genesis, Bereshit, 19, okay, 19:30 through 38. Why is this important? Why are we going back this far? Because also in the book, Brother Akwetey goes back to Bereshit to talk about famine being familiar in the book of Judges, not the book of Judges, in the book of Ruth, as well as in Bereshit. So it's only to put context on this, it's also important that the same figure who was mentioned, Abraham going down into Egypt, is a close direct relative to Lot, who is the progenitor of these Moabites. Sister Maya, are we on the right trail so far?
So far.
All right, so far so good. So far so good. So we're in Genesis 19:30, right? So again, please read the story. But for the sake of time, when they get out and they feel like they may be the only person there, that they're not going to be able to continue their father's name, because they won't be able to. The father doesn't have any children. They're without children, right? And so the older daughter has this wild, crazy, incestuous idea and follow through with it, and tells her younger sister to do the same. There is born the firstborn Moab, and the secondborn Ben-Ami, which is the ancestor of the Ammonites. Okay, so Moab is from an illicit, incestuous relationship. Please keep that in mind. Is there anything you want to add at this point, Sister Maya?
Absolutely not. We're doing well.
Are we doing well? All right, we're going good on time. We're doing well. Oh, you handing it down in the room. Hallelujah. So we're gonna continue. I say that to say, why is this important? When we get to, that's June. Sister Maya, can you write this too? Genesis 19:30 to 38. That's the space where we're gonna find Lot's daughters. Okay. When we get to Deuteronomy 23, we have this conversation about who cannot come into the congregation. There's a lot of things I'm going to kind of backtrack, but actually I should backtrack before I go forward. Hold
on. Akwetey, give me that again. Genesis 19.
I'll go back. Let me just do the Deuteronomy portion about the illegitimacy of let the text speak for itself. No one of illegitimate birth may enter the assembly of the Most High, nor may any of his descendants, even to the 10th generation. No Ammonite or Moabite or any of their descendants may enter the assembly of the Most High, even to the 10th generation. Here's the reason. For they did not meet you with food and water on your way out of Mitzrayim, and they hired Balaam, son of Peor, from Pethor in Aram Naharim, to curse you. So Israel did not have, when Israel became a nation that came out of Egypt, Israel did not have, let's say, the best relationship with Moab and Ammon. It wasn't, it was on the rocks. Okay. So even though they were close, and by that time both were becoming nations, you can't say they was BFFs. And the Creator is like, yo, don't forget, don't sleep. Remember what they did when you was coming out. Even furthermore, before Israel came out, because this is Deuteronomy, so that's after the coming out, when Israel was still in the wilderness, in the book of Numbers, you will find in the 25th chapter, again, we're giving context to possibly why this story or the book of Ruth is necessary, because this history would have been known by Israel. Numbers 25, it speaks about Israel's sin with the Moabite women. I'll just read a little bit. 25:1. When Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to commit sexual immorality with the daughters of Moab. Remember, the very genesis, the very seed of Moab and Ammon is sexual immorality. It's incestuous relationship. You can't forget that. It says these women invited the people to the sacrifices of their deities. Then the people ate and bowed down, meaning the people would have to be like the men, mostly, down to their deities. When Israel joined themselves to Baal Peor, and by the way, Baal Peor is the Lord of the Open. Research that on your own time. The anger of the Most High flared up against Israel. So Moab was a cause of sin in the nation. Moab's original origin was centered in sin. Deuteronomy says to the 10th generation, Moab and Ammon cannot come into the congregation. And then Numbers 25 is telling you, and continue to read about what the men and the nation fell into following behind Moab and the stigma that was on the Moabites. Sister Maya, are you still there with us?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Nah, I just said if you were still there, you with us? You with us?
Yeah, I've been trying to talk to you. Can you hear me?
Nah, I couldn't hear you.
Oh. Can you hear me
you
now?
You had said something, sister.
Yeah, I was asking you for those verses, but I just looked them up and put them in. As
no, I didn't hear you. Yes, Genesis 19:30, Deuteronomy 23:3-4, and Numbers 25.
Yeah, Numbers 25.
The whole chapter. The whole chapter speaks about the whole Moabite issue. That's the same thing with the Moabites. You know, anyway, please go read it. Please go read it. Some people, again, they're going to have theories about this, theories about that, but there's some things that were happening between the two nations that were not good, and was left on record for us to understand this. So I'm going to see if Sister Minor wants to put in any thoughts at this point, because we just wanted to give a little context before we actually get to the book of Ruth.
Right, because it's important to give the timeline, because Ruth is not happening. Although Ruth is a separate book, it's not happening in a bubble. It's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening in the context, number one, of Judges. And number two, it has all of this history behind it. So it's already very textured, even if the full discussion isn't happening in real time for the book of Ruth. It's picking up between Naomi and this particular Moabitess. But it's important to note that we are talking about marriages. And this is not the first time there is this kind of marriage relationship happening. And so we have to look to see if something had happened before, what the conditions were, what the consequences, if any, were, and why this other relationship might have had the difficulties that we are looking at, other than what's provided in this particular account. Because as we know, that the Israelites are coming to a particular point, coming from a particular place, having a particular history with the nations round about them. And this period of Judges is kind of like is a period where they're transitioning from a nomadic people to a type of settlement people, and then they're going to later become a kingdom. And so we're looking at them right now in this liminal stage between having been a nomadic people and interacting with the nations round about them, to this period of judging, and then to later establishing a quasi-sovereign kind of nationhood or kingdomhood. So these contextual steps are very important, and so it's important for us to go back and look at how they got there. So it's great that Amuna is walking you through this timeline so that you understand the relationship that has been built, or the tension between whatever nations we have, whatever nations we've allied, and the like. Because again, Naomi isn't existing in a vacuum. Ruth is not existing in a vacuum. And we've always said, and I'll say this and close, in every conversation that we've ever had where marriages were taking place, Amun and I have always emphasized that marriages are not between individuals. So although we're naming sons and we're naming property owners, the fact is that relationships such as marriages have always been between families. Families are intergenerational. Families are all about descendants, are all about ancestors. So we'll see a lot of referencing ancestors and a lot of talk about ancestors. And that's because Ancestry and history and nationhood are all important. That's why we see it in the commentaries. That's why we see it when we're trying to parse through these accounts, because we understand that not only is context of course is important, but history is important. And with that, I'll close.
All right, agreed, agreed, agreed. This is now we're seeing it. Two nations coming together who, based on history, wasn't necessarily supposed to be linking up. Because the last time you linked up, you did exactly what the Torah said you weren't supposed to do. You know, give your daughters to marry you and give your daughters in marriage. You weren't supposed to do with that. They're worshiping other deities, they're worshiping other peoples, and you were not supposed to mix these two, especially Moab. It's not like it's some unnamed, arbitrary, not too sure if we can. But Moab was one of those who were named that couldn't even come into the congregation for the things that they have done against the nation of Israel. Keep that in mind. And again, that's also, if you want to read some of it, it's in Numbers 25. So the beginning, we're not going to necessarily do a blow for blow, just an overview. Again, Akwetey, if you want to come on in, then we can, go ask you some more questions for some clarity. But Akwetey begins paralleling, again, as I said, the famine in Bereshit to the opening of the book of Ruth. So the opening of the book of Ruth says, now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. Now, again, when famine in the land rings true, when you hear the term famine in the land, he goes in to speak about what he understands as famine in the land. But Sister Mina, when you hear famine in the land, automatically what comes to your mind?
Judgment.
Come again?
Judgment.
Judgment. When there's famine in the land, according to the Torah, according to the blessings and the curse in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26, we know that famine is a judgment. It's based on, because the Most High says, when you do such and such, then you get rain in due season. And so when you don't get the early rain and the latter rain, we know that the people, there's sin within the nation, and then that brings the judgment of the Most High, and he tells you that the sky is going to be like brass over your head, and basically the earth is going to consume it. It's going to go into famine. So we know also by the book of Judges, we don't know exactly when this happens in Judges, but we know Judges says, if you look in the beginning of Judges, every man did what, Sister Mayana?
What was right in his own eyes.
Everybody did right was in his own eyes. And again, so when you in the Torah and you're reading and you're remembering, and you hear things, they're supposed to send bells and whistles and triggers like, okay, so that means here's the setting. Things are off. It's not all good in the hood. You understand what I'm saying? Things are off. So as we continue, in the book of Ruth, we say there's famine in the land, things are off. And the next thing we hear about is Naomi, Elimelech and Naomi and their two sons, skipping time. Now do you want to go into a little bit about the possibilities of why they were leaving, Sister Maya?
Well, we know that they're leaving because they're trying to flee. Okay, fine. One of the things that I would say, and I found it very interesting that Akwetey chooses the language of exile, because my go-to would be, this is a migration pattern. What we find is that when there is a scarcity of a resource in one place, or a famine or drought or the like, a people will move to where resources are. So this is a migration pattern. He chooses another word which I found interesting. We'll talk about this idea of exile instead of migration, or since we've already talked about judgment, this idea of fleeing. So there's this idea of flight, and in that case of judgment or from judgment. And then the more, I guess as an anthropologist, I would say there's a migration happening, this idea of going to where there are resources from a place that has not had a scarcity of resource. I think that it's great that Akwetey brings to the reader's attention that Bethlehem means house of bread. Bethlehem, the house of bread. And now there's actually, this place has no bread, right? This place has a scarcity. It's like bread is, like rice is a staple food in Korea or in Asia, bread would have been a staple food for Israelites. So for the house of bread to have no bread is a major judgment against the people. And it's interesting that Elimelech and Naomi and their family believe they can escape judgment on foot.
Correct. You went to migration when he went to exile, and I went to fugitive,
Yes, you did.
right? Because fugitive is somebody who's trying to escape persecution, escape something. So they had the capacity, like you said, to um, leave, to migrate to another place. So they kind of had some level of substance to be like, nah, this is whack. I'll be back, right? But again, if we're going to look at the context of judgment happening in the nation, and that the text also lets you know that wherever you go, that the judgment will, the curses will run you down and cleave onto you, then the reality is there's no way that you could have escaped to, if this is something that was contributed. So whether or not they were righteous or wicked, the story doesn't come out in the forefront and let you know. But what happens next, where the perishing of the husband, as well as well, yeah, first the perishing of the husband makes you go, hmm. And then as we get to the two sons, after the father perishes, they go and do something that we see in the book of Numbers, which is now they pick Moabite women to now become their wives. Was that necessarily a right given that we just went over the history of the Moabites and the Israelites, and that their children, their offspring, the question would be, would they be able to come into the congregation? You see what I'm saying? So what was on the forefront of their mind when they went and picked up these women? Is it like an Esau thing? The women are around, so I'm just gonna. These are questions again. The women are around; they're just here, so I'm just gonna pick one of the locals because I ain't got no time for that. Questions. We've seen this pattern before, Sister Mayana.
Yeah, I wanted to, before we go too far into or too far past the first thought of famine. When I was reading it, we discussed this, that when we were reading some of Brother Akwetey's thoughts on famine and taking it to Genesis, to go into Bereshit and go to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, I thought that was really interesting, since we have a much closer famine, especially if we're going to later theorize that perhaps this is a descendant of Ruth that is talking about or that's recording her story, her account, and her history. So I want to read briefly, very quickly, 2 Samuel 21. This is found in 2 Samuel 21, verse 1. And I'll do it just up to verse 1. And it says, "Now, during the reign of David, there was a famine for 3 successive years." So I found it interesting that he went to Bereshit instead of to the ancestor, which is much closer in proximity and time. It would have been this famine that would make more sense and be closer in significance to Ruth, because Dawid is her direct ancestor. The effort, I presume, was to tie this woman to our patriarchs, and perhaps to create an echo about the famine, because they all experienced a famine prior to going into Egypt. But here, just to listen to her near ancestor, her near descendant Dawid, again, 2 Samuel 21:1. "Now, during the reign of Dawid, there was a famine for 3 successive years, and Dawid sought the face of the Elohadi. And the Elohadi said, 'It is because of the blood shed by Saul and his family, because he killed the Gibeonites.'" So this gives us this affirms what we were saying earlier, that where there is famine, there is what? Judgment, right? It's
Yeah,
because
yes.
we have done something, and the Most High is responding to something we have done. So we see here the end. We see here the the result and we hear the cause. The Most High tells us, because this is the cause. I'm sending a famine to you. Dawid experienced a famine for 3 years. And he seeks out the Most High, and the Most High tells him, it is because of the blood shed by Saul and his family, because he killed the Gibeonites. So this reinforces that famine follows judgment.
Correct.
To insert.
No, correct. I'm sorry. I'm a little bit slow on the mute the button. So yeah, hopefully that paints and illustrates where we are now as we're looking at the narrative, as well as some of the things that Brother Akwetey shared. Like Sister Mina said, it's important to note that, and some of the good things that he did was cross-reference some word studies and bring forth some information as it relates to Bethlehem. It would be like calling a place a bakery. You know what I'm saying? Bethlehem, house of bread, it's a bakery, right? Or a place where they produce the grain to produce the bread, right? And this is, again, it's the bread basket. It's the important spaces within certain regions. And so, as Sister Mina is saying, for there not to be the grain to produce the bread, we also see in other places where the Most High sends judgment, he says, you know, I don't want to misquote the number, how many women are going to be able to break their bread in one oven, right? And so that means that, again, it's problematic. It's problematic. So when we fast forward to this whole conversation of them leaving, those who stayed behind, were they righteous because they endured the judgment, or were those who left righteous because they escaped the judgment? We have that same conversation today with, should we flee, or should I flee, or should I stay? Like, wherever you go, the judgment is going to be there. You know what I mean? So we're having kind of a similar conversation amongst ourselves today, but the reverse is that we are not in the land asking, should we flee out of the land? We are in our places of expulsion asking, should we flee to another location? Should we stay, or should we go home? Right? And so this is a continual conversation, I would think, throughout the text, because Israel has not really found that level of ability to be comfortable in the place that we were promised. It says in the time of Shlomo there was peace, and intermittently you have these little times of peace, and then this uncertainty pops out again. So we've really been, as a nation, very unstable, and you know, we can't be like, oh, and we've dwelt peacefully for 100, 200, 300, 400 years. That's just simply not the case of the nation. And so this is another one of those situations. Was there anything you want to add as we proceed? Again, we're trying not to give a blow by blow, but it's kind of difficult when you're trying to run up to some of the things that Brother Akwetey puts forth in the book. So are we doing a good job, brother,
right,
so far?
Because we are going to review, and we do want to give some comments on the commentary. But the fact is that the Ruth has been the subject of many more raids, and a lot has been attached to and assigned to this particular account, probably because it does center around women, and the men sort of play background to what the women are doing, the decisions the women are making. And so I have found that many of the male teachers have put a lot of thought into trying to label or box this in a way that makes sense to them. So it's important for us to go over some of these things. And although we don't want to spend all night on it, it is important because a lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people are getting information incorrect. And a lot of people are making, listen, you see, I'm choosing my words. It's incorrect. And some of it is very creative. And so it needs to be addressed.
You know what my mom said is arts and crafts time, y'all. Yeah, as she said, some of the conclusions, I think, as Sister Mine is saying, because this is the one book, again, that's centered around women, where you don't really see this much attention paid towards the woman being center stage. And actually, Akwetey speaks about once the story shifts and the husband and the sons die, and it gives no reason. I think that's very interesting. Usually, when someone passes, like in the case of Judah's son, Onan, it says because he was wicked, right? And it tells you why he dies in a certain situation, for the most part. But for three people to up and just kaput, and there's no reason given for what happens, I find that intriguing. It's intriguing. Again, we're talking about the Book of Ruth for those who just joined us. Why we're doing a book review, as well as talking about the overall doctrines that are formed from the Book of Ruth, and what would lead the author not to give us a bit of insight into why not one, not two, but three. Was it sickness? Was it, they told you what happened to Dawid. Dawid wasn't well at the end. Uzziah, he had leprosy in his forehead. We get a lot of information on we know why Onan passed. We see how Shaul and his son Yehonatan passes. We get a lot of information on how somebody goes out, right? So for this story to be centered on the life of what later comes out of it is Ruth, which is a Moabitess, and not to hear about the Israelite men that went there and what happened to them, I just say it's intriguing. It's interesting. It just mentions they passed, which is, what are your thoughts on that, Sister Mina? Not mentioning, or no thought or mention of what happens, but so far whether they were righteous or wicked, but we see an action happening, but there's no name given to this action.
It shows that the writer is definitely more invested in these women, and it sounds like particularly Ruth, because it gets named. It's interesting that the book is named after the foreigner. It's not named after Naomi. It's not named after Boaz, who steps up as the kinsman redeemer. It's named after the foreigner, the stranger, the interloper, the visitor. It's named after her. And like you said, the Israelite men who the Tanakh and the Torah and even the later letters and the epistles all tend to concentrate more on the masculine principle. Is very interesting that that's the exact opposite in Ruth. Even Esther, who has her own book, arguably, um, the agency, the involvement of the men is not in the backboard. It's not in the back. It's not operating in the background. We see what her cousin Mordecai is doing. We see what the king is doing. The king puts all these things into motion when he makes a decision to unseat Vashti, right? So we see that the men are moving the account until Esther emerges and comes to her own. But that's not what happens in Ruth. In Ruth, the men die off fairly quickly, and then the account and that's when the account takes off.
Very fascinating. And again, for those who just joined us, we're reviewing the book as well as talking about the general Book of Ruth, thoughts we've had before we read the book, just discussions, just looking through, the angle and why the story may have been presented, and the purpose. What was the reason for presenting the story? What information were the author or the authors trying to convey to the listening audience? These things are all important as we continue. So again, there's no orientation whether they be righteous or wicked, but we do see some actions that result in perishing before the time. We do see the widowhood of Ruth, and this is where the story picks up of Naomi deciding she's going to go back to her homeland and trying to tell the foreign women who her sons married, who are no longer with them, that you can go back now. Now, this is the point where Akwetey begins to play with the possible reasons as to why they could be going back or why one stayed and one go. What are your thoughts on some of the theories that he put forward as to why they stayed or why they wanted to stay?
Since the text is silent, it's pretty much fair game to piece together possibilities. But right, because the text is silent. But what we do know, for example, I find it very interesting. I told you, I've had this conversation with you a few times. I find it interesting that this declaration that Ruth makes to Naomi, that her Elohim will become Ruth's Elohim, and Naomi's people will become Ruth's people. My question then becomes, what was Ruth's Elohim when she was married to the Israelite man all those years? And
Question.
who were her people then? I mean,
Question.
you married an Israelite. The Israelite people weren't your people then. You
Question.
don't. You. The commitment that we're told to celebrate is her commitment to her mother-in-law, and not what kind of wife was she to the first Israelite man she had. That this is when her conversion starts. So I find that interesting. What were they still entrenched in their Moabite culture? Were the men were their husbands permissive? Right? Were the husbands did the husbands allow them to keep this Moabite culture, to keep their Moabite uh, uh, culture and what I want to say, I guess their Elohim, their deities, were they allowed to continue in those traditions? And now this is something that Naomi definitely was not going to do, because Naomi was ready to go home, and she knew she wouldn't be able to continue that if she was going to go with Naomi.
Correct.
So
That's
that's
a that's a good point.
because we see that Ruth's ancestor, is her descendant Shlomo. Shlomo does what? He allows the Ammonite to keep her culture. He builds altars for her. So it's not impossible to imagine that Mahalon and Kilion did the same thing. They were accommodating to their wives in their region. I mean, they're in Moab. It's easier to accommodate them where they're in the middle of the culture.
And I would like to add to that I forgot what I was looking into, that this thought when the widow, um was it a book I was reading, that it's the widow's fault if the husband passes, right? And so when you forward that possible question, which is realistic, because even in the time of Yaakov, when Yaakov is going back to Bethel, he's telling those who are with him, put away your idols now. So we have a precedent of Israelite men allowing the foreign women that they marry into to keep pieces. And this is exactly why the text says, don't marry them, right? Don't marry those who are going to bring in these things and corrupt you, essentially. And so the question then is culturally, what is taught of an individual, say coming from Moab? Do they have the same things? Because remember, Moab comes and says, curse Israel. So she marrying an Israelite, what implications did that have on her in her culture? Did she have some place to go back to? Did she feel guilty for the death of the husband? Does she feel like she owes Naomi? All of these things are questions that one may ask to find out why they felt so compelled to say, I'm not going to go back to my peoples. I'm going to rock with you. Because if we just enter the story at, oh, Naomi said, go back home, and you said, nah, oh man, that was so nice. Man, you good peoples. I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no. We lose the possibility of what could have possibly be compelling her to say, I have nothing to go back to. There's a possibility that she had nothing to go back to, or that she felt guilty because Naomi now is without husband and without sons. Anything you would like to add there, Sister Marilyn?
Oh, no, absolutely. And I think that it's because, and I would like to submit for consideration that because there are all of these outliers, and because there are all of these other possibilities that are substantiated by other parts of the text, it's very interesting that there's this push to present Ruth as the heroine. That
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting that, like you said, we pick up at her conversion and we're told to celebrate that. Like, great, she's going to embrace our Elohim, she's going to embrace our people. What a great Moabite. But then we forget she was
Mm-hmm.
married to an Israelite all of those years. What was she doing then?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting that that gets downplayed. Even in our retelling in 2018, we are still conditioned to not look at those things.
Correct. And there's no, again, I have to to bring this to the forefront, because the text is really hard body when this person is wicked, this person is righteous, right? There was a woman who lived and she was righteous, and there was a man who such and such, and he, you know what I'm saying? But in this, uh, there's no orientation of the morality of the individual thus far. You know what I'm saying? It's just very, it's not as it usually is. Let me just say that, for you to say, okay, and they were wicked because they did this, or they were righteous because they did this. We're not really seeing that. We have to kind of like move this to the side, or be like, okay, this happened. So then what could that possibly mean? And then we have to use what came before to say, okay, the two sons perished, although their parents named them
Right.
not very good names. They could have been sickly. Someone could make the argument, what are you talking about, sis? Their name meant, what was their name meant again?
Sickness and always destruction.
Right. So that, the parents already, why would you name your children? You know what I mean? Like hope and trust or something. Like, so the mindset that they were in, for you to name your child that, then one would have to ask the question. If it says 10 years, they dwelt there about 10 years in Moab, right? That may have to mean that at some time before they left, these children were already born. So was the famine already in by the time they was born for them to get those names? Because
Question.
they're of marriageable age by the time they get to Moab. You see what I'm saying? So is this some long running thing that's happening, and then they finally get to the point where like we're out? I don't know. That's just a random question. See, now y'all are getting to see green room, what green room looks like. When you don't have all the answers, you're just, running it through the mill. Go ahead, Sister Miranda.
But like you said, since there's nothing explicit, what happens is the names start to become highlighted. We have Elimelech, and so we're told I guess we're supposed to get some insight into his character, assuming that the parents named the child to have a particular spirit to him. He's that's what my eldest king, right? So the expectation is that Elimelech would have been a righteous man because he would have put the Most High and considered the Most High as king. Naomi would have been considered also righteous if her name is to take center stage, and we are to believe that she was according to her name. Then she was pleasant, of pleasing disposition, and she was all of these things. So that too would lead us to believe that she was upright. And then and that's what makes the naming of the children all the more interesting for us to have a father who is named my Elohim is king, and a mother who is a pleasant disposition name their children something so dreary. And so all of a sudden we are in this dystopia, this kind of dreary space in the house of bread, and they have retreated into what has been historically an adversarial space, right? So it's very, very, very interesting, to say the least.
I'd have to agree. The story turns, and again, I hope you guys are enjoying. We're backpedaling a little bit so that we can go forward with the review, as well as other things that we may have heard concerning the Book of Ruth. It's a little bit different. Y'all are getting to see some, just how you begin to parse through some information and begin to look at different spaces that may not have been explored within the text. And that's what our brother Akwetey did in a commentary on the Book of Ruth. And and I would like to speak to him. So if you're out there, Brother Akwetey, holla at us, or come back next week and we'll have like the little exclusive interview with your thoughts and why exactly you wanted to write the book and some of the conclusions. We may not get to the end right now because we're still like in chapter 1, given the background, but maybe you can join us again so we can get to how you got to some of these conclusions, because I found them worthy of conversation. Let me just say that. But as we're moving forward to the possible reasons that Ruth decides that she's not going back. And like you said, why now are you doing your power is my power? Wasn't that on the vow wedding day portion? Wouldn't Ruth have already known that you had forsaken? You know what I'm saying? Why? These are the questions that one would ask. And why are you vowing such a vow to your mother-in-law that you didn't, or does it indicate that she was really sure of when you were married to her husband? Or her sons? Did she accept you? But then she goes on to say that you showed her kindness. So there's a possibility that she accepted you when you guys were married. So unlike Rebecca, who was like, get them out of here. I think they're gonna be they're gonna do me in. Don't let Yaakov marry anybody here. We don't know. Based on what it is, it seems like they had some type of relationship that was worth preserving and following her even into the space where now she's running away from. And there's another consideration. I think we already brought that up, that there could have been something also causing them to say, you know what, I can't stay here. I can't stay here, possibly. So we're going to go forward, Sister Mayana. What else is there that we wanted to kind of bring out? We brought out what was going on with the women in the wilderness, the relationship between Moab, the origins of Moab, why this wouldn't have necessarily been a good thing. Okay, so we get back. The people are recognizing Ruth. I mean, not Ruth. I keep saying Ruth. The people are recognizing Naomi. Let's pick it up there, Sister Maya.
Wait. Before we go there, there's another very interesting point of contention that we find throughout the retelling of this account. The fact that Naomi does not send them back to their father's house.
Oh, yeah.
Back to their mother's house. So Akwetey comes to a very interesting theory. This idea of Naomi not wanting to, making a distinction between their own biological mothers and her not being that, and sending them back to where they came from versus following her around. That was a very interesting consideration. I've seen other mores, I guess, other teachers, other brothers come up with other theories. But for me, that's not, these theories aren't necessary because it happens. We see it already. I'll show you where I saw it the first time. The first time I was reminded of the mother's house is in Bereshit 24:28. And this is when Abraham's servant finds he happens upon Rebecca. And he goes and he says, so I'll pick it up with 27. Blessed be the Lord, the Elohim of my master Abraham, who has not withheld his kindness and faithfulness from my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's kinsman. Verse 28. The girl would have been Rivkah in this case. The girl ran and told her mother's household about these things. Maybe that's for you again. Genesis 24:28. And the girl ran and told her mother's household about these things. Now, what's the context at this point? We see here that what was Abraham's servant Eliezer tasked with doing, Amuna?
Finding the Esau.
Finding the Esau. Right. So he's so Rivkah at this point is potentially a what?
Esau.
Right. So the context is marriage. Right. This is a marriage context. This is about a woman who, this young woman is now about to have a discussion about marriage. It's a marriage context. And the household belongs to who in this case?
He says the mother's household.
The mother's household. So it's not unusual, and I'll give it to you. You know, we like to say you need at least two to bear witness, right? At least two examples of this. So I'll give you a second one, and this one is closer to home for Ruth because this is the song of her descendant Shlomo. And in the Song of Shlomo, chapter 8, verse 2, it says, I would lead you. This is the female speaker saying, I would lead you and bring you to the house of my mother, who taught me, and I would give you spiced wine to drink, the nectar of my pomegranate. So again, this is the woman who is speaking about her love, her beloved, and introducing him to her mother's household. So this idea of matrimony, and that in this instance, that the woman or the mother, and this is in the mother's household, this is not an unheard of idea. We see it first in Bereshit. We see it again with Ruth's descendant Shlomo, that the woman is thinking of the house in terms of her mother's house when she's bringing the news or tiding of marriage into the household. So I want to submit that for consideration. Because like I said, you and I have both on different occasions and sometimes together taught this account of Ruth. And so, we've done significant study in these spaces, and we've considered these questions, and we've had these questions asked of us because we work with women, and women ask a lot of questions. So it behooves us to be well studied in these spaces. So rather than theorize, as the men do, about why Naomi is saying, go to your mother's house, we do see there's a precedent for thinking of the mother's house in these terms when we are sending tidings in this particular context of marriage.
Correct. Thank you for bringing that out with your 3 witnesses, Sister Mayana, because that is a point that was brought up, something that was explored within the text and the commentary about the mother's household. And so that was good for consideration. Thank you for submitting that, as well as the thought of the when Naomi says to Ruth, I'll read it, because he also goes into that as well after the mother's household. And he says in 8, and Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, go return each to her mother's household. And Sister Mina just spoke about other spaces where we see this term used. The Most High deal kindly with you as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. And so Brother Akwetey is exploring the possibilities of why, and I guess I'll read a little bit here of why, what could this kindness be? So he says, Naomi first prays that the Most High treats the younger women with kindness in payment for the kindness they showed to her and the dead. What was the kindness they showed the 3 deceased men, we asked? Perhaps providing a fitting burial or remaining with Naomi after the death of their husbands. We will find the same commendation on the lips of Boaz later in the text. What possibly could be the kindness, Sister Mayana? This is commentary too. We commented. What could have possibly be the kindness, in your estimation, that Ruth and Orpah showed onto Naomi?
They could have observed the appropriate mourning periods. They could have gone according to Hebrew custom. They could have consoled. She had lost her husband and now both of her sons. So being there as a consoling and a comfort to Naomi, and Naomi's in a foreign land, so they would still have to have some kind of sustenance. So to share whatever resources they may have accumulated as married while being married to the sons, and not hoarding those things away from Naomi until Naomi had made the decision to make her trip back. Again, making the trip back home may have needed certain things. And since originally Naomi's daughter-in-laws were in agreement to going back with her, they would have probably helped fund the return home. So there's a number of ways they could have shown kindness to Naomi in these very practical ways.
I would agree. And I wouldn't say that because the story doesn't say, we don't know how long the kindness could have extended. Was it in the origin? Was it in the beginning of the marriage? Like you're saying, was it when you saw, it doesn't say anything about the relationship until we get to after the men are no longer there. So it's very difficult to decide what part of the kindness, because we see the same thing with Abraham when he's going to buy, he's a stranger and he wants to buy a plot, and, you know what I'm saying, of land to bury Imasara. We see that. And we see them saying, no, take it, and and they're having this discussion, and so they're peaceable to him. You understand what I'm saying? So there can be so many things. Again, we don't know what these two women felt, because now this strange woman, her husband is dead, and now her two sons. They could have felt compelled to aid her, to help her, to say, now we all we got. This kind of conversation. And I lean towards there had to be some of that in Ruth in particular, because even when her countrywoman went back, she's like, I'm not going back. You know what I mean? Is it, and it doesn't say any, your deity will be my deity, your power will be my power. What led her to that moment? We don't know. The text doesn't say, but we only could surmise what we think, what the text really doesn't say. Again, this is not forwarding any doctrines, anybody. This is not forwarding any doctrines. What do you make of Ruth trying to send her back and letting her know that I can't help you. I don't have anything for you. The only association I had with you was my sons, and they're gone, and I'm not going to have any anytime soon, so you might as well kick rocks. You know what I mean? Was Naomi ready to just piece her out and say thanks for everything, give her a solid and just keep going? Did she see the situation, or did Ruth see Naomi as a possible lifeline now that she's leaving? Because listen to what Naomi says to her. What do you think about what she says to her, and what that says about the extent of the relationship that she had with Ruth?
Naomi's response to Ruth is very interesting for several reasons. One being that it's very clear that Naomi is resolute in severing ties with these young women who were married to her sons. So, I mean, there's always the possibility. I mean, I'm sure that in your own life and in my own life, that when relationships end in one place, it doesn't necessarily mean, like, for example, the mother of my nephews. So that relationship with my brother, that relationship is gone, but she's still the mother of my nephew. So she'll call me or she'll hit me up on Facebook or whatever. There's nothing I could do about what happened between her and my brother, but she's amicable with me. I haven't severed ties with her. Right. But for Naomi to be so willing to sever ties, perhaps we could envision a number of reasons. Perhaps they are a sorrowful reminder of the fact that everything that she brought with her is now gone. Her husband, her sons, they're all dead. These women could be reminders of the death of her sons, and she doesn't want to look in their faces anymore. Right? It could be she has a lot of very good reasons for not wanting these women to follow along. Also, she's not going back home with anything. So she can't support her own sons who are gone. And yet there's these women who now become dependent on her. And maybe she doesn't want to shoulder anybody else's children. She actually makes some sort of allusion to, I'm not of bearing age. But if I got married tomorrow, I'm not bearing any children. If I did, you're not going to wait for them. So you and I have no tie. So for Naomi is making a very pointed statement here, saying that what ties you to me is your marriage to one of my sons. I don't have any sons. And the next son I have, you're not going to wait until he's old enough. So that says to me, there's no other relationship there. The only relationship Naomi is can imagine is the relationship between these foreign women marrying into her life. That if not for that connection, there would be no connection. So with there being no sons, there is no connection. She's going home. But Ruth is imagining another connection. Ruth is saying, I'm going to cleave to you, like directly to you. Nothing and no middleman. Like for Ruth is trying to create a direct connection without any connecting tissue in terms of a son or the like. She's saying that my relationship is to you. And that's interesting.
That leads us to see that in the beginning, when she's severing these ties and when she's leaving, it's one-sided. And so Ruth is compelled. The narrative doesn't give us the full reason, but now we can begin to say, okay, what is making you want, after she already told you, I got nothing for you, what is compelling you to cleave onto him? She's not going back with riches. She says she ain't got nothing for you. You know what I'm saying? She's not promising you a husband, and she's an old woman. Are you feeling guilty? Are you sorry? Do you have anything left? You know what I'm saying? Would you rather take your chances with her? Did you, she does say your power is my power, but even still, it's Ruth that she wants to be associated with. And the question is why?
You know what's interesting? I think that if this was present day, and you and I, we get letters, we get inboxes all the time. If this was a present day scenario, I think we would both be tempted to do the Solonomics and find out whether no, follow me with this. Do the Solonomics or Ruth and say, are you missing a mother figure?
Yes, yes. That's why I'm like, I keep saying it. Why? She's clearly saying, get off me, sister. You know what I mean? And run along now. And she's like, nah, I ain't leaving. Maybe I never experienced something like this. Maybe you're the only mother I ever had. Maybe I'm not looking. This is Ruth, possibly. Like, I'm looking for the comfort that you bring me. You know what I'm saying? I'm looking for the mother that who knows? Like you said, we don't know, but there's something definitely there, because her response to get away from me is not normal, especially when, oh, word, your husband, you ain't got nobody else for me, I'm out. If she was only looking for a man, her response is not normal. And Naomi explores all of the possibilities of why you need to get a grip. And even still, she's like, no, I'm not leaving you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's such a pointed declaration. It's such a pointed and direct commitment. And it's interesting that the text allows for Israel to continuously refer to her as daughter. Naomi, even though she rejects these young women, she calls them daughter. Boaz calls them daughter. But I don't remember, and correct my memory, but does Ruth ever call her mother? Or is just in her behavior? Her behavior is all as a loyal daughter, or a good child, of an excellent daughter. She behaves that way. She is loyal to Naomi. She goes out and works to help sustain Naomi. Naomi is doing what have she's doing her best not to shame Naomi.
Right.
So she's actually a field daughter to Naomi, but I don't know if she ever calls her mother the way everyone calls her daughter. Everyone refers to Ruth as a daughter. So we see Israel adopting this woman. We can see Israel adopting her. This is Naomi's daughter-in-law. This is and Boaz calls her daughter. I think that when the child is born, the women say that this daughter has brought a child for Naomi. So it's very interesting that we get to hear a lot of the language of adoption for Ruth.
And that again, we will never know. But again, the writers, like you're saying, the way in which the story is framed, we have to understand that the story is framed. We don't have to. It behooves us to be honest about the story being framed and presented in such a way that is not the norm, right? Early on, people usually get classified as something. I keep saying that because it leaves it like limboing, and then the Ruth becomes again, she's the grandmother of Dawid. So Akwetey forwards the thought that the possibility is that Shlomo writes it. But we had the green room way before this point. We're like, you know what? It could possibly have been Dawid who wrote the book.
Right. Or the
book to be written. Only because who else would find so much interest in your Moabite grandmother, right? Like, who else would be compelled? That's like me saying, oh yeah, Mayana, I'm gonna write a story about your dog. And for what? So somebody, not calling someone a dog, but I'm saying something about that is important to one person, but to someone else it's like, well, why are you writing that story? You have to have a vested interest in wanting to write the story.
But and let's go back to and we at the top of the conversation we pointed out that there were plenty of ancestresses worthy of a book way
Yes.
before we get to Ruth. Like you said, Dinah is the first daughter born in three generation among 20 children. She's the only daughter.
Right.
And there's no word from her on her own behalf. We have no idea what happens to her after she's defiled. She just evaporates into obscurity, and so we have to guess what happens. So we don't even know if she has descendants of her own. And,
Correct. No, no one knows. No
right,
one.
we don't know. And there's so many. Tamar, Tamar, who gets mentioned, who gets is an honorable mention in the book of Ruth.
Yeah, she gets honorable mention.
Right, but she doesn't get her own story.
No, Miriam, who is the sister of Moshe, the oldest sister of Moshe, who is very integral in Israel's wilderness experience, leading the women in song.
Right.
Miriam, she don't get no book either.
No. Huldah doesn't have a book. Even Deborah doesn't get a whole
Deborah
book.
doesn't get a book. Why are we bringing this up? Because if these women who are very notable
And Israelites.
and Israelites, okay, whose father, who has the pedigree, who has the lineage, who gets this mention in a male-dominated space, gets no book, and in some spaces don't even get to tell their own story. Like they have no words. You know how you reading your script and you be like, I got no lines. Where my lines at?
Right.
She has no lines.
Right.
Dina has no lines. Does Dina have a line?
Not one.
She has no lines.
Not
The
one.
brothers have lines. She has no lines.
Right.
In the book of Ruth, somebody purposely, intentionally,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Akwetey brings light to this, like, center stage, move the dudes, and center stage are the women, Naomi and Ruth and Boaz, right? And Ruth has lines and Naomi has lines. But in all these other spaces, again, it could have easily been called Naomi. You know what I'm saying? But it wasn't. It was called the Book of Ruth. And again, we cannot separate what people Ruth is coming from and what was the relationship before it gets to this point where now Ruth is casted in a different light for then now her relationship, this is my theory, to be accepted
Right.
by the people. How? Because we're going to have questions. Like, what is this, Dawid? What is this, Shalomo? So now we have to have the relationship be one that it's like, yeah, but okay, for instance, we're going to kind of jump a little bit so that we don't go so far into the night, right? So if we jump a little bit forward and we talk about the Kingsman and Redeemer, they're back. Naomi, she's given the information she's feeding Ruth, because rightfully Ruth is a stranger in the sense of she wouldn't possibly know all of the culture. So Naomi's telling her, yo, this is how you do it, da da da. And like Sister Mana said, like a good daughter, she's following the instruction of her servant Redeemer, right? And she's doing what she says to do, and she's like, all right, good daughter, this is what's happening. We're gonna be all right. When the Kingsman Redeemer conversation comes around, the reality is the first Kingsman, the reality is Ruth would have been, in their eyes, of a nation who you weren't supposed to marry in the first place.
Right.
So we can't skip over that detail in the story to be like the dude was wicked. I don't know if the dude was wicked. The way the story pictures him is like he was off, but the reality is, who is this stranger, such and such? Oh, she's from such and such. Am I supposed to get with her? Is the question, because if you do, can your children come into the congregation?
Absolutely not.
And if you want to come into the congregation, then why would you have children by her? So then you have to ask the question, what was Milion doing? What was my kinsman doing? What was he doing marrying you? It sounds terrible today, but if we're going to go by the history, if we're going to go by the narrative, then one would have had to ask that question. But even in the text, that question is not being asked.
See, that is why the Jewish people and those these Israelites our Israelites who have taken this Jewish study have opted to make Ruth no longer the foreigner, but a shade of Israel, playing fast and loose with the country of Moab versus the land of Moab and the like. and trying to say that she was indeed an Israelite, and completely turning a blind eye to the fact that she is a foreigner. She refers to herself as a foreigner, and everyone else looks at her as a foreigner, and not paying attention to the fact. And this is another reason why it's possible that, as you and I have been thinking, that Dawid commissioned this tale about this specific ancestor, because when Dawid runs into issues, Dawid flees to Moab, the king of Moab, not Moab Plains, not Moab Field, not Moab, the king of Moab. That's where he goes. So for us to read that and wonder, why would he be so comfortable going to Moab to flee for safety? Like, this is not just, you know, a visit. This is for safety, to hide me. First before I read it, in light of the timeline and the history, we see that the Most High tells you explicitly, do not have a relationship with these people. We see that the Most High says there's trouble that comes with it. We see that they come from a line of incest and undesirable sexual relationships, and so yet David goes to these people, and we find that in 1 Samuel
22.
I'm sorry?
1 Samuel 22?
Correct. 1 Samuel 22. We see that we go so 22 and 3. For those of you who are trying to follow along with us, we are in 1 Samuel, the 22nd chapter, the 3rd verse, and it says, do you want to read that, Imuna?
Come on, sis, let's start at 1. Why are you skipping? It's only
let's go to the top.
Let's go to the top. Y'all know I get nervous when we start in the middle. David therefore departed thence and escaped to the caves of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard of it, down thither. Wait, hold on, I'm missing something here. Hold up. Let me get it again here, because something seems cut off. I'm reading on the text in the screen, and something seems to be missing. Okay. Sorry. David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented gathered themselves unto him. And he became a captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. And Dawid went thence to Mitzpeh of Moab. And he said unto the king of Moab, let my father and my mother, I pray thee, come forth and be with you till I know what God will do for me. And he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the while that Dawid was in hold. And the prophet Gad said unto Dawid, abide not in the hold, depart and get thee into the land of Yehudah. Then Dawid departed and came into the forest of Hareth. So he goes to Moab for protection for his parents. And in this case, Jesse would have been what? Jesse, Obed, Boaz. How does it go? Boaz, what is he, the grandson?
Yeah, it would be the grandson, because it's Obed, isn't it?
Yeah, I think he would be the grandson. So yeah, and he takes his parents down there.
Yeah. How you go to Moab and smooth be like, give us shelter? Question. And this is Moab, this is Moab proper. This is not Moab, the occupants of the newly the residents of the newly occupied land. This is the king of Moab. This is Moab proper. So that was grandfather, yeah. Right. So this idea that it's not real, that she's Moab, but she's not really Moab. Okay, this guy is straight up Moab. He's the king of Moab.
And you asked him for protection.
Yeah, how you smooth go up into the Moabite king? Like, okay, think about this now. I want to flee. So I go to Obama. No, you gotta have a reason to go to Obama. You don't just step to the king. You just don't do that.
And it's a relationship, and that I explored the length of that relationship, the stories that are passed down from that relationship, you know, the connections that now Ruth brings to the conversation. Although Naomi is the one who takes and nourishes the child, what was that passed on, like you said, for him to be like, yo, Moab, you don't know, me and your family, so you know what I mean? Secure us till it's time. And then they did. Not only did he ask, but they complied. The text says he puts them there and then he goes off in holding. He brought them before the king Moab and they dwelt with him all the while. So it wasn't even on some old nah, get out of here.
Right. Because later doesn't David remember this? That we remembers this and later pays the debt to, I think, an ancestor of the Moabite king. Like later on.
Why are we bringing all this up, Sister Mayana?
Because everything has context.
Oh.
We're trying to establish why the book of Ruth was even written to begin with. Did David have motivation for having this narrative put out there? Is there a reason why Ruth is being discussed in a particular light? Is there a reason why we are taught it in a particular way? And so, are we discouraged from asking these other questions about why Ruth is here, what her motivations are for following Naomi? When does she become, why is it that the commitment is to Naomi and we didn't hear it with the first Israelite husband?
Right. Because we have another story of a foreigner marrying in, which is Rahab, correct?
Correct.
And Rahab doesn't get, she does have some lines. She has more lines than Dina does. She has lines, but she doesn't get this full blown and book. She's worked into the narrative as well. She's instrumental in hiding the spies so that they don't get accosted by her countrymen, right? And so they was like, yo, remember me, you know what I'm saying? Did the Tupac on them. And so Rahab is another one who's in the story, but she doesn't get a full-blown, blossoming narrative tale. We also have the book of Esther. Let's be fair. Because we said we also have the book of Esther, Hadassah, right? I didn't hear you, Sister Maya. What did you say?
I said we mentioned Hadassah. We did. We mentioned that.
I just want to make sure, because people like, what you talking about, sis? What about Esther? So Esther is a Hebrew, and Esther has a whole narrative as well. So
once again, Esther is not immediately isn't the focal point. The thing that pulls the narrative is that the first king, Xerxes, he makes a decision about Vashti, and then we see Mordecai emerge as a speaker, and it's not until Esther blossoms. Esther has to kind of blossom into her role, and then she folds again, and it's not consistently about her. It's the males are not in the background. The males are very active, doing all kinds of things. Haman is playing up against Mordecai. There's a tension between the men. There's a competition between the men, and Esther in the beginning is just a pawn. She's being moved along the board by these men and their quest for emerging to power and the like, and prestige and the recognition. And then it's not until she says, you know what, everybody just be quiet, I'm gonna go talk to the Most High and I'll let you know. But that's later in the narrative. She has to come to that point.
Right.
She's done begging for an audience. She's done waiting for Mordecai to come with solutions. She's done with that. Mordecai gives her the challenge of, oh, you think you're safe because you're in the palace? Don't forget where you come from. She said, you know what? Bet. Don't come back and tell me nothing else. I'll tell you. But she comes to that. This is like Akwetey says, from the very beginning,
it
the men introduce and die off, and then the women just, kind of take up all of the space. They take up all of the white spaces and they become the story.
Correct. So do you have a problem with that, Sister Marina? Because you're always speaking about women in scripture and biblical femininity. So what do you have an issue with Ruth taking the front stage? Do you have is there anything that somebody could be listening to them like, well, what's the problem? You know what I'm saying? There's women, there's taking the front stage in a narrative, who has a voice, who has lines, and what's the problem?
Well, the problem potentially, or no, very specifically, is that this woman is being held up as the ideal for Hebrew women without being a Hebrew woman. And so
Wow.
we have a book fully dedicated to the foreigner. And my issue with Ruth is the same issue that I have with Jezebel. Jezebel does the same thing on the other end of the spectrum. When the men want to say that we are unacceptable or undesirable, or doing something that they are unpleasing to them, they call us this Jezebel. They compare the Hebrew woman to this foreigner to
Mm,
shame us. Then they find
mm,
another foreigner and tell us to be like her. And all of the
mm.
Israelites in the middle, we're told, are not good enough. Ima Sarah, we have to question her. Um, Ima Rivka, oh, we have to question her motives.
Oh, she was wrong. Mm-hmm.
Right? She was wrong. Deborah is not really a leader, right?
Right.
Huldah, we have to question even. Uh, well, Huldah was married to so and so, the wardrobe keeper. We find a way to diminish every single Israelite woman in the middle, but will
Mm-hmm.
give us these foreigners to either shame us or to give those are our heroes,
Interesting.
isn't it?
Fascinating.
Isn't it? And it's
When
not biblical. We see that now. Oh, when it comes to, oh, you're not humble enough. That's why I'm going to get the Asian women. They're more humble than you are. I'm going to get the Japanese woman. During the World Wars, that the Japanese woman was on the cover of Jet magazine, Ebony magazine, as our chief rival for taking our men, because the men were saying you're not like them. Once again, we're being told, right?
mm.
We have to be like, we have to, we're not too humble enough. We're not, all of our anger issues are undesirable. The browner we are, but the same traits on the Latina is just spicy or sassy or what have you,
So
right?
this goes back, possibly, if I may, as we're having this conversation, to because in the book, I don't want to get too far from it. What you're saying, stick a pin, because in the book, it's interesting how Brother Akwetey takes. I'm going to jump a little bit, and then we're going to come back. But just to your point, takes Proverbs 31 and takes it from, as many will have it, to looking at these qualities that makes a good Ishet Kael, right, a woman of valor, and then he takes it and makes it. He says it's an ode to the man, right? Which I found interesting that, as you're saying, these things that it's taken away from the feminine, the Hebraic feminine principle, and given to anybody but her. Like
Right.
this is anybody but you. You know what I'm saying? Like this is not you, no way, no how, could never be you. And should I do the spoiler? I'm not gonna do the spoiler. We'll have to come back for the chapter 5 of where Akwetey takes that. But based on what you're saying, these examples, it couldn't be tied to the matriarch, our first Hebraic Hebrew Israelite female. She gets defiled, and so thereafter, is it at that point that she's not the person to look to? Because you have people looking to Judah, looking to Levi, you have people looking to, though, but you don't really have people looking to Reuben, right? Because Reuben, in the beginning, Reuben does something while he goes upon his father's bed, and Reuben, no one wants to aspire to be Reuben.
Right.
But is it the stain of the initial thing that happens in the beginning that makes her not desirable anymore? As we said, we don't know anything about her. And so is that now the closest we have to go back to Ima Sarah, who was like Abraham was a Hebrew, but wasn't an Israelite. But when you get to the Israelite realm, the first woman is not something that somebody says, hey, when I grow up, I want to be like Dina. Is that what I'm saying? So is that what's going on possibly?
I would like to say that that's possible, but then by that same token, then why doesn't that apply across the board? The first time we meet a man having a relationship with the Moabite women are used against the men. We see the conclusion of being with Cosby.
Right.
And so why doesn't that leave a bad taste in everybody's mouth and say, you know what, maybe we shouldn't do that?
Because it's a man doing it, Sister Maya.
Well, it was the man that defiled that defiled Dinah. Dinah, she didn't sit there and defile herself.
Yeah, this is the strangeness of how we view, again, if the masculine principle is doing something, it's acceptable. The double standard, if the feminine principle does it, it's like she commits adultery by a onesie. You know what I'm saying? She defiled, like you said. There's some thoughts that when you hear, I don't want to take personal responsibility, she defiled herself.
Right.
Like you did. Well, look what you did to yourself. You
Yeah.
know. So you hardly you don't really hear. You hear of Shechem, and you hear of the anger of the brothers Simeon and Levi about what happens. But as from her father Jacob, you don't hear that. You
Thank
hear the preservation of the self more than the preservation of the feminine principle that you were responsible for.
we see that we did the same thing. That we sitting there being angry on the inside that
Right.
Tamar got defiled and didn't do spit about it.
So did that set a precedent? This is the question I asked it the other day. I forgot what we were on, but I asked it the other day that did this set a precedent for the way the Hebraic woman is viewed, and why now Ruth doing something of this nature has more weight on the scale than if a Hebrew sister did the same thing. Would it be expected of her, but Ruth doing it makes it, you see what I'm saying? It makes it extraordinary. And
Right.
there could maybe some of that going on as well.
Yeah. It's like when the dog dances or when the monkey
Correct.
dances.
Or
Because
when
the
the
monkey's
cat
not expected to dance.
right.
It's super cool when somebody who's not expected to do something does something. Could be. Could be. However, is that wrong headed? Is it wrong headed to not reward Yisrael for coming into her womanhood, for working in her function and her purpose, and then to diminish her that way, but then reward the foreigner?
I
That
would,
sounds wrong-headed to me. I mean, we even see, and it's this, and again, like I said, there were a lot of really good features to the commentary that Brother Akwetey did. So I don't want this to become, oh, we didn't like the work, or that we found it just like wildly problematic, because that's not the case. But there is another point, another portion where it appears that Akwetey attributes more to Ruth than necessary.
in
Um,
in what way?
in
Help
terms
help help the listening audience out.
of Ruth being more cognizant of the culture, of the Israelite culture, and what would have been due to her than the native, in this case Naomi. There's even a point where he suggests that Naomi has forgotten how the law works, in terms of the fact that Ruth is able to go and glean from the field at all is because this is the law. And that for example, there's a point where Naomi says, where did you go? What have you? Because she came back with what Akwetey estimates as 66 pounds.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Of barley.
oh, yeah, where did you go? And
Right.
he, it's as if she forgot that she had the right to go to these lands, instead of saying 66 pounds is an absurd
Right.
amount of
Yeah.
grain. It's an absurd amount of grain for you to have just gleaned, because the
Right. In
gleaning,
somebody's yard. You had happened upon 66 pounds of barley. Like
yeah,
where at? You know what I mean?
correct. So because remember, gleaning is you are gathering what was left over.
Correct.
Right? She's coming in with a bona fide bushel, and she's like, "This, where did you go?
Right.
Right? What was this about?" That's a legitimate question, because what you came back with is not normal.
Correct.
I would hesitate to say she forgot. Instead, she's making an informed inquiry. This means that she is very aware of what Ruth should be coming back with.
Right.
And
Little
this
something,
brought me
something to
to,
eat. You know what I'm saying? Little something, something.
yeah,
And maybe I eat for a few days. You gotta go back out there and do your thing. Like you came back like you was going to market.
right.
Yeah, you came back like what in the world? Where did you go?
Hey,
Um,
that's a legit question.
yeah,
That's an informed question.
yeah.
So, but that speaks to the willingness to give the foreigner more credit than the native,
Mm.
right? And again, this is not unique to Akwetey. It's just that Akwetey asked us to read the book and comment on the book and to write our review. And of course, I'm going to give a relatively great review of the book because I feel that it is informative and it has a lot of valuable insights, particularly where he parses through the Hebrew and picks out keywords that give um, not just not just texture, but the nuances of why these words are important and why certain word choices were made, and what the implications are when you see a certain cadence or a certain pattern in the Hebrew. It's great to have somebody walk you through those types of things. And of course, Akweti is an expert storyteller, so it's very easy to follow. It's always engaging. It's a very compelling commentary, but and of course it's always great to see other people's insights and where the conclusions they come to, but this is ours, and like I said, we've been teaching this for some time and we've been dealing with women for some time, and their questions, and so we have a pretty good handle on this account as well. And as you see, we're very invested in not just this account, but what came before it and what comes after it. So that's why, for example, I thought there were some very interesting choices to go all the way to Bereshit. Well, we have Dawid like a block away. Like Dawid is right there, having a famine, going to Moab, doing all of these things. So, in terms of proximity and context, Dawid would have given, would have seated us and would have located the reader. Uh, I think more organically than creating ties to patriarchs of old and spaces of Egypt. Like Egypt is and the famine and Egypt relationship is kind of pretty far removed from what's going on with Ruth, as opposed to Dawid's reliance on the king of Moab. Dawid having to experience famine because Saul's family had done this thing, this idea of famine and consequence, famine and judgment, this idea of you can't run away from judgment. We said in the beginning, we saw that Amuna used the word fugitive, that they thought they could flee judgment only for judgment to hop on their back, follow them to Moab, murk everybody there. So at the end of the day, they escaped nothing. Whatever
Correct.
they were running from caught up to them. The idea here is that famine means scarcity. So was there a scarcity of faith? Was there a scarcity of obedience? The famine is simply is a scarcity of a source and a resource. Resources are needed for sustenance.
Right.
And so these things that they were hoping to flee and find elsewhere, and don't we do that when we don't think that the truth is giving us something, or we don't feel like following the Most High is giving us something, we think we can find it better elsewhere?
Yeah.
And the Most High has to catch up our coattail and be like, "Where you going?"
True.
So there's a lot happening here. I mean, like I'm gonna put this as a little green room, and for you, I'm not gonna put it out as doctrine, but I'll put it out for you to consider this. When we meet Naomi, Ruth, and Orpha, right? They are talked about as sisters. One makes a decision to go one way, the other one makes a decision to follow Naomi. What else is considered sisters just a little bit later on? The northern and southern kingdom. One makes a decision to do one thing, the other makes a decision to do yet another. We find them on a fork road. And these two sisters have a decision to make. Where they're going, who they're going to follow. and they go in different ways. And we see how the Most High deals with them. So I'm just saying that there's a lot of imagery happening in Ruth, a lot of connections that we can make about what's happening in the story and the way all of these women are moving, the decisions they make, why they make those decisions, what kind of parallels can be made. A lot of things are there. It's a very, very rich account, and I think that we're right to say that it's very telling that in this case, all of the feminine principle gets to take center stage, and the masculine principle, instead of them being the ones who are moving the account, the women are making choices. The women are making decisions. Akwetey makes a point of the description of Boaz as the strong, the great man, or the man of strength. There was Gabia Hael, right? So the great strength, the man of great strength, right? That's how he's understood, which is also interesting because we don't know anything about Boaz from Ruth, other than he's somehow a kinsman of Elimelech. Matthew is the one who tells us that he's the ancestor of Rahab, right?
I believe so.
We don't hear anything about we get an implication that he's related to Elimelech because he gets to be the kinsman redeemer. But when we get further into the text, Matthew tells us that Rahab is the mother of Boaz. So yeah, so when we get to the parts where nobody would touch Ruth, even though she's supposedly the best to ever do it, she's pretty, she's nice, everybody likes her, she's good people, but nobody. But when it comes time to marry her, no, I'm not going to complicate my own inheritance. The only person that is willing to marry her is Boaz, and according to Matthew, Boaz has a mixed heritage too. Question.
There's a lot of questions. I think we're definitely going to have to come back for a part 2, Sister Mayana, as we're nearing the 11:45, quarter to 12 mark, because there's some things, as you said, that the richness in the text and the ideas that have been forwarded in this narrative or this commentary, as well as others, are worthy of, some of them we have to go there and then stop and stay in them for a minute and kind of look around to see what is being said, what is not being said, and what it needs to possibly be reconsidered when we are trying to frame this conversation. I think thus far we've done a pretty good job of bringing, I guess, shining a light on some of the context that is around, that formulates this, sets the stage, let's say, for the book of Ruth. You're definitely going into some spaces that make you go, makes you go, And I think we should see if we could get Brother Akwetey to be willing to come through it, come through and sit down with peer review for you as we peer review this text and ask some pertinent questions and maybe get some feedback from him. And maybe he'll come out with another portion as he's adding on to his commentary here about who, why, where. Like I said, where he ends up, I'm like, I don't know about this. I'm like, I don't know about this. You know what I mean? Again, a lot of things that are not said. These are some of the stuff that you do, after the Shabbat, where you just chop it up and you think about, you don't forward them necessarily as doctrine. You know what I mean? As some people do, like they have this vested interest to make it a doctrine. It's something that you like, have you ever considered to try to, because the truth is all of the pieces are not fitting. So this is what they call, where I come from, reasoning. You know what I mean? You're like, you ever consider such and such? Well, maybe, and you begin to look at it to see all of the possibilities that could be, because we're talking about people. And we're talking about people, we're talking about flesh and blood, living people that have issues, concerns, all the things that we have today. I think to a certain degree, and I heard it again, someone said it today, and now I get to the point where I hear it, Sister Maya, I want to be like, This idealization of the Eastern mindset versus the Western mindset. I'm like, that's my rolly eye face, right? I'm like, okay, stop. When you talk about Eastern, if you want to go all the way east, we're at the very tip of Asia. So we don't have to say that's Eastern mindset. Idolatry is Eastern mindset. You see what I'm saying? Subjugation of the feminine principle is Eastern mindset. If I can go someplace in the East and they're doing these things, then you cannot tell me, you cannot necessarily elevate a quote Eastern mindset over a Western mindset when we have these same issues that exist in both of these spaces. Israel is not the most East that you can go on the map. What after, you see what I'm saying? So it's like, okay, so when you ran to West Africa, was that Western mindset? Because in your understanding, that was the West. You couldn't go no more West than that.
Right.
I don't mean to be like, raining on nobody's parade, but now we've lifted this up like everything we don't like, we'll just throw it in this bag. And everything we idolize, because we can idolize concepts, we'll throw it in this bag, and then we'll make them do East Coast, West Coast fighting.
Right.
It's like, well, stop. Because wait a minute, how east was Rome from you? Wasn't it north? I'm like, dang, let me look on the map. Was Rome north or east or west?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it north of Israel?
Rome is north.
So how did it become west?
we got to our land of our oppression and our captivity, and we think of everything from that vantage point.
I see that.
Orientated our mind, but this is our new orientation. We are no longer in our Eastern mindset. so we have orientated ourselves to our land of captivity.
Well, here's the thing. Apparently, we never were in our Eastern mindset to a large degree for an extended period of time. Because whenever we ran back to Egypt, you ran west. When you go to Egypt, when you went to Babylon, you went east. Where's Babylon from Israel?
We went over here.
You went north, actually. You went northeast. Like, I don't want to be like a stickler on directions, but it's like I need like a whole list of what, because then I need some tell me the map, like get me a compass so I can understand. Like if I go to Asia, you know what I'm saying, I should see this. Isn't Russia east of Israel? Or is it northeast of Israel?
I'm gonna say it's northeast.
Correct. So does Russia have a northeastern mindset?
Yes.
Oh, it's late, y'all.
We gotta go.
But yeah, I think just for us in mind, it's a good conversation. We have Nakia saying famine is rarely attributed to a single causation. Multiplicity of contributing factors tend to be manifested in such instances as plague and famine. And I would agree. That means there had to be some long-term deviation from Torah. This is what causes these things. Whether or not, because Torah could people be like, oh, you're not keeping Torah. The simplicity of Torah, even when it deals with the land. If the Torah says, 6 years you till the land, the 7th year you let it rest, and for the last 40 years they have not been keeping Torah, they have not been letting the land rest, they have been taking all the nutrients and the minerals. I'm just giving an example how a deviation from Torah can cause a famine, right? Because you deplete the soil of its nutrients and it's not able to give to you anymore. And so that crop that it was supposed to rest, and the crop that was supposed to come after that was supposed to be like twice the amount, and you didn't do that. Now you can set a whole cycle of events. You see what I'm saying? If you cut down all the trees, this is something that's happening in Haiti. If you look at an aerial view of Haiti versus Dominican Republic, you'll see deforestation in Haiti. You'll see all of the trees being cut down for firewood, but you'll see green lusciousness on the Dominican Republic side. And so, as we know, trees are connected with the whole water cycle. So if you violate the universal laws of creation, this can set people think, let me not go there, but essentially we need to be in touch with the things that were left on record. It's a cycle. And anytime we interrupt the cycle with human intervention, with negative energy that we put into a space and just violating certain common sense principles, we can set into motion things that will have adverse effects on us as humans. You see what I'm saying? Cutting down all your trees is contributing to why there's no rain in your spot. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's like simple science. And so this is, and when we go to some places, there in Israel, there is barrenness. There are no trees. And there was actually a project, Sister Mine, I saw many years ago. There were some Europeans who were coming in with a project to plant, I think it's 1 million trees.
Wow.
I don't want to, because they wanted to, they understood the connection between the trees, and they have you like donate such and such, and then you could plant a tree. And they understood the connection between the trees and water. Right? So I say all that to say, we're going to have to pick this back up.
Yeah, we got to put this back up. We have to go and look at this proverb conclusion, assertion, and theory. And its evolution, because I would really hoping that Akwetey will be on for that, because we had an entire show. Akwetey was on TRC for half a season, and while he was there, we had the opportunity to explore Proverbs 31 specifically, right? And so it's interesting to read his conclusions and insights in the commentary versus the live conversation we had last year. Last year, right?
I think it's last year, yeah. I think it's last year. So definitely, we'll see if we can get him behind the scenes to tell him that we're gonna follow up next week. We're not gonna beat you up, Akwetey. You already know we ain't gonna do it.
I already know how we do. We LOBEU.
Yeah, for real. I need a half time, Akwetey. What's good? I just wanted to substantiate what I just said. The Jewish National Fund, plant through trees to the Jewish National Fund. Plant a tree in Israel to memorialize family, friend, and loved one. This is a meaningful and traditional way to show you care and help green the land of Israel, along with each order. A beautiful certificate is mailed to the recipient. It says, over the last 100 years, JNF has planted over 250 million trees in the land of Israel. 250 million. So this thought of planting trees, there was another man, I forgot the name of the country, there was a famine or lack of water in the country, and he single-handedly realized that it was because of deforestation, and so he began to plant trees, and everybody's looking at him like, yo, we don't have any water, what you're doing, because the root system of the trees helps to filter down the water, and the water goes in the ground and all of this stuff, and it sends back up, and all of this stuff like this. It goes all like this. And so he started planting trees when everybody else thought he was crazy, because there's a connection between trees and rain. That's why there's a lot of rain in the rainforest, right? But anyway, like Sister Mina said, we'll be back, or praise be to the Most High, prayerfully next week, where we will continue to discuss the conclusions of the book. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to add. Sister Mina went a little bit in. She didn't go all the way in, but she went a little bit in. Is there anything you'd like to say before we sign off? Maybe we'll promote next week a little earlier, so that
Shabbat rolled up on us.
Huh?
This is the Shabbat rolled up on us.
Yeah. There's a lot of very busy. But again, Akwetey has sent this book some weeks ago, so definitely wanted to give it a gander. You know what I'm saying? A little once over, so we could have this discussion. So anything else, Sister Mina? We'll come back next week, and most I will. We talk about the conclusion of this matter. Akwetey, we want to talk about the conclusion of the matter.
No, just told out to everybody who rocked with us all the way up until the midnight hour.
The night season.
In the night season.
Yep. All right, everybody. Share the video, share the link, subscribe to the channel. We'll be continuing to have conversations. If there's something that you would like us to discuss, I wouldn't necessarily say research, because research takes a lot of time at this point. But if something that we've already researched or discussed, or you would like to revisit, feel free to hit us up at underthepalm2@gmail.com. If you would like to be on this side of the screen, And sometimes people just like, what they saying over there. But if you want to be on this side of the screen, you could do that too. We love to have hear your voice and your thoughts. So signing off. We'll talk to you again.
Wait, Mona, we're gonna drop the Proverbs 31 TRC episode in the box.
Oh, hold on, stand by. Hold on. Go ahead and entertain the people, Sister Man, until I come back. Let me go look for this thing.
Well, okay, absolutely. If you have any questions for us, feel free to email us at under the palm, the number 2. It's under the palm 2 at gmail.com. We do receive them. They go right to our cellular phones, so we will get your messages. Also, you can use this time to think of any questions you might have for us about our Ruth study and our insights on this book. So we look forward to your questions and your responses. As Muna said, please feel free to share. And we will be returning at 10 p.m. on Saturday to continue our discussion. And,
You know what I noticed? Sometimes we don't get questions, Sister Mayana, until the block is hot, man. That's when the questions come, unfortunately.
oh, we got to say something controversial. Let's say something controversial. Can we think of anything controversial?
Nah, man, because again, hold on, I'm actually trying to find this thing here.
Oh. I read. Okay, I'm not endorsing this, but I read that the theory goes, word on the street is that Boaz really had something for his head gleaner, and that's why he was asking about Ruth, because he wanted to make sure that his boy crush wasn't trying to hit up with Ruth. That's
you know what? I'm not even gonna go down that rabbit hole.
Yo,
I have found it. I have found it. I'm not down that rabbit hole.
That Boaz wasn't checking for Ruth because he was checking for his gleaner. That's what I heard.
Where'd you get that one?
Yo, don't make you already know I'm the queen of PDF files. You already know I will drop the list. When I tell you I have read everything on Ruth, that's how I know. When I see certain theories, I'm like, okay, I know you got that. I've seen it before. I have read everything on this lady. Like everything. So they have theories on Boaz. They got theories on Naomi. They got theories about everything. So I really have looked at these things from all these different vantage points. And that's why I say it's always interesting to see what other people take these things. So it's interesting. And like we said at the beginning, is that people will bring to the narrative where they are and where they're trying to go. Right. So like you said, like where on earth do you get the idea that Boaz is checking for his reaper? Well, I mean, if you are in the mindset of you need this quality to be in the text, you will read into it. You'll read it into it. Right? So there's a certain community that has an investment in reading this quality into the text. And so they do. So it was very interesting.
Okay, so before we go, while I was on the wrong thing, so this is why it wasn't. Before we go, so is there a push for legitimizing Ruth? Could this be the incentive for this text to be written, legitimizing Ruth, because the text clearly says that this type of marriage, I said it earlier, is not one that we should be engaging in. And being that it was engaged in, being that Boaz then redeemed her, because that's law. Because you know how people take law to hit law? You see what I'm saying? So they say, oh, this is law, but this is law. You see what I'm saying? So you have law saying, prohibiting you from reproducing, and then we have someone who transgressed law. And like you said, when somebody in another conversation, when somebody goes off of Torah and then asks you for a solution, you tell them you don't have a Torah problem, right? And but here in this instance, we have Boaz giving a Torah solution to an issue that Torah didn't create, because Torah already prohibited you from doing that.
Right, right. This would not have been right. Had you followed Torah, Ruth would not be an issue.
Right. But being that you didn't follow Torah, and now here she is, and she's modeling a type of behavior, because we can't overlook, and we're going to come back and talk about what we can't overlook, that her behavior, her work ethic was highlighted in the narrative. That, wow, look at this foreigner. Wow, look at how she's moving. You know what I'm saying? This is a desirable quality.
Well, that was highlighted in the commentary, but it's not highlighted in the text. The text is not making that kind of wow moments. I think that Akwetey makes a wow moment.
Okay, I guess we'll have to come back and examine that.
Right. I mean, she's gleaning. No one else seems to be overly impressed with her gleaning. It's spoken about because she's unusual. Like it's not that the work ethic is necessarily unusual. She's unusual. She's the foreigner, the stranger, doing this thing among the natives. So naturally, or expectedly, attention is brought to her. Like you would bring attention to any oddity.
Right.
Right. So it's interesting. And she's Naomi, and she came with Naomi. So, like if I have left Brooklyn several times. There was nobody at the airport waiting for me when I got back. So apparently Naomi was somebody in the community that when she came back, it made a stir.
Right.
With women in the city. She must have been someone.
But you said that, and I know we said we were going to go. That novelty of someone who is different. Israel, in times past, the men of Israel have really gravitated towards, ooh, what's this? It's different, foreign exchange, right?
It's exotic. They like to say, oh, it's exotic.
And that still happens today. We see Jashar giving a little bit more information about Dinah, that was also Shechem's response, like, yo, who's shorty? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So he is in his space where, according to Jashar, they're out and about, and she's looking at the women of the town dancing, and Shechem has the same question, yo, who's shorty?
Right.
You don't look like you from around here.
Right.
This is the conversation you have. If you happen, or if you come from down south Kentucky and you end up in Brooklyn, and it's clear that you're not from Brooklyn, the brothers are going to be like, yo, who's shorty? Looks like
you even got to be from out of town. You could be from out of hood. Like, I've never had to live in the projects, but I would date the projects. All right. So if I would go to the project, the women be like, yo, she ain't from around here. Dudes be like, yo, you not from around here. Like you said, who's shorty?
Who's shorty?
Because you not from here. We know, because we know everybody in our hood. You not from
everybody, and you're not one of them. Right. And Boaz is having this moment. Like, yeah, she's gleaning and all, but she don't look like us. Who is she?
Don't look like us. Who is?
But again, as we're considering all of these things in light of what the Torah says and how the conversation unfolds, there's a possibility that there's an incentive for writing the text in light that it is written in, to give us the feeling that Ruth, like Sister Mina said, so many commentaries have been written, so many people can like, oh, I'm waiting on my Boaz. Now you have that.
That's the worst. Oh, I don't like to use the word hate, but I'm very disturbed.
Waiting on my Boaz?
I'm gonna get my Boaz. Okay, because it's a clear indication that context has been removed from the Cinderella story.
I'm gonna get my Boaz.
This idea of, Ruth didn't sit around and wait for Boaz. She went and showed initiative. You better go get your Boaz. Okay, absolutely not. Boaz is operating under a whole different context than some of these women thinking they're gonna roll up on dude talking about you my Boaz and cover me. Yo, cover me with your Charlotte, or I'm showing my age. Cover me with your whatever.
Yeah, ball jacket. No, if you'd have said 8-ball jacket, it would have been
Averex jacket, or whatever they got these days. right? Cover me with your Jeezy, right? Throw your Jordans on me. I don't know, but
So we're gonna have to come back and talk about waiting on Boaz then.
definitely.
Proverbs 31 woman. That's what we're gonna come back and speak about because this is a thing. As you know, this is a thing. And like you said, Boaz was operating under redeeming, which is not just like, oh, who's shorty.
Right.
Although we're gonna come back because Akwetey takes it somewhere else. He takes it somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah, it gets a little steamy.
Yeah, we'll leave it on that. Thank everybody for tuning in. My eyes is getting the Amuna Yisrael low vibration. That means I'm sleepy. That's the sleepy eyes. So all praise be to the Most High. Thank everybody for tuning in. We will come back once again and continue to discuss the book.
The book. And yeah, the book, not Akwetey's book, the book of Ruth. We will also continue to comment
reviewing the book.
Yeah.
Reading the book.
The book.
Yeah, that's why I said the book with the little slashy thing and then Ruth. You know what I mean?
And then,
so everybody has
yes, Lala Tov.